The question we're going to answer in this video is, when will the third temple be built? So Jesus told the apostles that the second temple was going to be thrown down, not one stone would be left upon another. And in Ezekiel, the third temple is laid out. The architectural design, etc., is laid out in the third temple in the book of Ezekiel. So it would follow that since the plans are laid out in Ezekiel, then everybody would want to get right to work on building that third temple, don't you think? I mean, in the book of Haggai, God rebukes the people for not working on the second temple and tells them, you've been worried about your own house while my house remains in ruin. You better go up there in the hills and go grab that lumber, start building my house. So they would have known that they needed to get right to work building that third temple. Is there any language talking about the third temple in the New Testament that would indicate that they were building it, or that they had plans to build it, or that they were looking forward to building it? So let's study this. We're going to look at every context regarding the third temple in the New Testament. The word says that in Jesus, God became flesh and tabernacled among us. Tabernacle would have indicated to us, or should indicate to us, that there was a shift in the temple of God. Because the thing that makes a temple is the presence of God. There are lots of temples in this world. Mormons build temples all the time. Does that make it God's temple? Only if His Spirit is there. But the word says that God does not dwell in temples made by human hands. So there was a shift. And you remember that Jesus said to the Pharisees, tear down this temple and I will rebuild it again in 3 days. And the book of John tells us He was talking about Himself. Even in 2 Chronicles 7, after Solomon has spent all of this time building this temple, he dedicates it to God and asks Him to dwell there. And God has to respond to him and tell him that He has accepted that temple and that He will dwell there. So a temple is only the place in which God dwells. He has to make a decision that this is an acceptable temple and that He will dwell there. Otherwise, do we have God dwelling in a prostitute? No. Do we have God dwelling in pagan temples? No. So the fact that counterfeit religions keep building, like the Mormon Church, keep building temples and cathedrals and claiming that God is dwelling there is absurd. It's ridiculous. It is without understanding. The fact that counterfeit Christianity believes that there's going to be a physical temple built in Jerusalem is nuts. It's not only nuts, it's wicked. It is an indication that people just don't even care about what the word actually says. They just want their own narrative. We're going to start reading about the temple in the book of Acts, because in the Gospels, we're obviously just talking about the second temple. We want to understand the third temple. Acts 17:24. Now, mind you, there's still a second temple. There's still a second temple. And in Acts 17:24, it is written that the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples made by human hands. So there was already an understanding among the apostles that there had been a shift. Well, when would that understanding have come? Well, in John 4, Jesus is talking with the Samaritan woman at the well. She realizes that He's a prophet, and she says to him, our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place we must worship is in Jerusalem. Woman, Jesus replied, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. So not in the temple. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers that the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and His worshipers must worship in the Spirit and in truth. Let me emphasize some things for you. Believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. Oh, you mean the mount the people in the Middle East have been fighting over? The mount that counterfeit Christianity keeps this narrative going that there's going to be a temple built over there? You mean that mount? Jesus said it Himself. Woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. All that means, by the way, that salvation is from the Jews is not that Jews are fulfilling your covenant for you as counterfeit Christianity believes, but that salvation is coming through them. It was extended to them first, then it was extended to Gentiles and came through Jesus Christ. Not that they are fulfilling your covenant for you or that they are taking on the burden of what God has commanded. We have someone in the body whose boss said to her when she asked to take these Sabbaths off, true Sabbaths, the boss said to her, well, thanks be to God that we no longer have to celebrate Sabbath or observe Sabbath. What a wicked, wicked person. The wife of a pastor, by the way. Thanks be to God we don't have that burden of God's commands on us Gentiles. The word says, let the Sabbath be a delight. Isaiah 58:13. If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's holy day honorable, and if you honor it by not going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, then you will find your joy in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride in triumph on the heights of the land and to feast on the inheritance of your father Jacob. You're not going to be saved if you're not observing Sabbath. Paul made it very clear that Sabbath still stands. You can't possibly enter God's rest if you haven't been doing it on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, and every time he's got a holy day. So John 4 makes it clear that there is no place, a physical place that we are going to be worshiping, but that we are going to be worshiping in the truth and in the spirit, that God's worshipers, his true worshipers, must worship in the spirit and in truth. Do we assemble? Yes, we still assemble. Did the early church have a place to assemble, guys? No, they didn't. They were hiding because it was illegal to be Christian. Why should we experience anything different? Why should we experience the cushy covenant while everybody else is suffering for Christ? God does not live in temples built by human hands. So when did this shift take place? Well, in the book of John, it says that God became flesh and tabernacled among us. Jesus had the Spirit of God. He became the temple. When the Spirit of God was given to the apostles, they became the temple. When the Spirit of God was extended to others through the laying on of hands after they were baptized, they became the temple. 1 Corinthians 3:16, don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in your midst? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person, for God's temple is sacred, and you together are that temple. So what's the third temple, guys? 1 Corinthians 6:19, do you know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price, therefore honor God with your bodies. Ephesians 2:21, in him the whole building is joined together and rises to become a holy temple in the Lord. And then in 2 Thessalonians 2:4, it says, he will oppose and exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. This is speaking about the Antichrist. So where do you think that this Antichrist is going to be set up? The Antichrist is the spirit of Satan. And many Antichrists have come, and then there is an Antichrist kingdom that is spoken of in the very end that is counterfeit Christianity. And it's worldwide. It is a kingdom that is worldwide. It began with papal Rome. It continues in the prostitutes that bore out of her. All these, by the way, who are claiming that there is some physical temple that is going to be God's temple built in the Middle East. There might be a physical temple built there, but it's not God's temple, and it is not the temple spoken of in Ezekiel, and it is not the temple spoken of in God's people in the New Testament. So if you want to be deceived, you want to be carried away with this big delusion that God sends to the wicked, which is defined as all the ways that wickedness deceives those who are perishing, then keep on with that narrative. But if you want the truth, I'm giving you the truth. I am reading the truth to you in his word. You have every ability to pick up his word and actually read it instead of going to false teachers and false prophets to tell you what's in the word. What did God say? Where are you going to worship him? In the spirit and in truth. You need to be relating with his spirit and reading his word. Otherwise, you're not one of the ones, because he says true worshipers must worship him in the spirit and in truth. Not through a counterfeit teacher, not through a counterfeit pastor, and not through a false prophet. Worship him in the truth, guys. There is no other way to worship him. So when I tell you that Easter and Christmas are not in the Bible, don't tell me that you're worshiping God. Don't tell me that you are lifting up a worldly holiday that is lifted up to false gods, but you lift it up to the real God, because that's not the truth. That is a blatant lie. It is a delusion, and you will not be saved by delusion. Revelation 3:12, to the one who is victorious, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God, and I will also write on them my new name. So he's going to make them a pillar in the temple of his God. How do you make a human being a pillar in the temple of your God? And what is this about the new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven? Well, later on in the word, it says that Jerusalem is seen as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. So Israel, Jerusalem, Mount Zion, temple, these are symbolic. They were established in the physical in order to understand the spiritual significance of these concepts. How do you make a human being a pillar in the temple of your God? Like, are you going to stand there like Samson, holding up some physical temple? Come on, guys. I don't see that in the architectural plan in Ezekiel. The architectural plan in Ezekiel is symbolic. That's the reason why it says, tell the people of Jerusalem the plans of this temple so that they may be ashamed. Because this is a grand, beautiful temple. It is a temple that is representing the grandness and the beauty of God's people being fitted together as his third temple. Revelation 7:15. Therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will shelter them with his presence. Revelation 11:1. I was given a reed like a measuring rod and was told, go and measure the temple of God and the altar with its worshipers. Now remember that the Gentiles are going to trample the temple. And who are the Gentiles, or the Antichrist? Who are they trampling? They're actually persecuting God's people, which are his temple. Revelation 11:19. Then God's temple in heaven was open, and within his temple was seen the ark of his covenant, and there came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and an earthquake, and a severe hailstorm. Revelation 14:15. Then another angel came out of the temple and called in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud, take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap is come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. Keep listening. Don't rely on your own understanding. Remember that where God is, that's his temple. Revelation 14:17, another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Revelation 15:5, after this I looked, and I saw in heaven the temple, that is the tabernacle of the covenant law, and it was opened. Out of the temple came the seven angels with the seven plagues. They were dressed in clean, shining linen, and wore golden sashes around their chests. And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no one could enter the temple until the seven plagues of the seven angels were completed. Revelation 16:1, then I heard a loud voice from the temple saying to the seven angels, go pour out the seven bowls of God's wrath on the earth. Verse 17, the seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and out of the temple came a loud voice from the throne saying, it is done. Revelation 21:22, I did not see a temple in the city, because the Lord Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. Okay, case solved. Anyone who does not understand this, believe it, keeps looking for some physical temple in the Middle East, it is because they are not his. They do not care about truth. This is what the word says. Please stop listening to false teachers and false prophets. Return to God, return to his spirit and his truth.